Welcome to The Thriving Mama, the podcast that teaches you not just how to survive, but to thrive in motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. About 10 years ago, I had a patient come to me who was having horrible gut symptoms. Think, gas, bloating, constipation, things like that. And she also had anxiety, which is super common. Those are often, kind of symptoms that we'll see together. And as I slowly started fixing her gut, all of her symptoms were improving. And so we added in a multivitamin because she was absorbing her nutrients better. So long story short, I got a frantic email from her about 2 weeks after we started the multivitamin saying her anxiety had skyrocketed again. And I had no clue why at the moment. And it led me down this rabbit hole of, trying to figure out why. And after quite a bit of digging, I realized that it was the methylated Bs, the certain type of B vitamin I had given her, which then prompted me to do genetic testing on her and realizing that she did not tolerate that specific kind of vitamin. And that's what led to her anxiety. So after we found that out, we switched to a non-methylated version of vitamin B in her multivitamin, and her anxiety improved again. But my main point in telling you this is that that was a huge lesson for me, and why soon after that, I started attending many conferences and doing trainings on genetics so that wouldn't happen again. Because we live in an age where a lot of people just prescribe certain nutrients. I don't want to say willy-nilly, but they don't necessarily do the appropriate investigation before prescribing certain nutrients. And that can cause side effects. And a lot of times that side effect is anxiety. And so this is why I'm so excited to bring on my friend and MTHFR genetics expert, Rhiannon Shalls, as she shares her expertise on this often confusing topic. In this episode, we're going to discuss what exactly the MTHFR gene and methylation are, how gut and liver health impact its function, how MTHFR causes anxiety, and 3 quick start tips on addressing MTHFR. Rhiannon Shalls is a certified functional nutrition counselor and a board-certified health coach. She began her journey in functional nutrition after struggling to maintain her chronically ill child's health after antibiotics. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she delved into research, eventually finding her passion in supporting others on the path to optimal health and wellness. With a focus on individuals with MTHFR, Rhiannon provides simple solutions to optimize wellness in just 90 days without spending endless hours on Google. Want to chat and get more personalized support? I'm offering podcast listeners a free 20-minute Thriving Mama check-in where we'll evaluate your physical, mental, and emotional health and provide useful resources to help you on your journey. You'll find that link in the show notes. Welcome, Rhiannon. I'm so excited to have you on today because there's so many layers and root causes for anxiety. And you and I both know one of the biggest contributors is genetics, and we'll chat about that today. But one of the central players is the MTHFR gene. And it's a topic that I feel like is overly discussed and not very well understood. And so I love the approach and your style of addressing it because, anything in the, anything that you do in the genetics realm, I feel like you make it very approachable when that topic can be complicated. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm super excited to dive into this with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to always talk about the nerdy things.
Yay, me too. And I always love it when I have somebody else who's nerdy like me on. So yay, so happy to have you here. And so I would love for you first to walk us through what led you down this path, the journey with your daughter and, all the things that you guys experienced.
Absolutely. So I feel like I need to kind of back up even before I had children to start with this, because I actually at 12 years old wanted to be a cytogeneticist. And so most people have never heard of that.
I did not know that. I didn't know that about you. That's cool.
Yeah. So I ended up going to college, was doing med tech, and then I switched to biology. I ended up getting my undergrad in Native American Studies, but then I went on to teach and taught anatomy and physiology. So my love for genetics obviously was still there. But in high school and after I graduated, I did work in a genetics lab. So I geeked out and loved all that stuff, but life changes, right? And sometimes we steer off course. And I feel like having my daughter was the thing that steered me back to doing what I love. And there's a lot of hell that I went through in order to get back on that journey. And so my daughter was born, we found out when she was almost 2, missing part of our immune system. So she was IgE deficient. And so we were going through chronic upper respiratory illness every 4 to 6 weeks for 2 weeks at a time, constant sickness. It was like a rotation. We were treating prophylactic. Her gut was fried. We were integrating some natural modalities, but we also were like, we don't know what else to do, right? Like nobody had tested. So I, as a parent and educator and all the things, right, dove down the rabbit hole of figuring those things out. Well, long story short, we ended up moving here to Florida and got a new holistic, focused pediatrician who's actually on vax. So I was very excited to be able to work with her. And she tested for MTHFR. And at that time, I'd never heard of it. I had no clue what it was, had no idea what these letters meant. Even though I'd been in the genetics realm, I was karyotyping. I was in fish, so I was doing different things than looking at the specific genes because what my role I was playing in the lab. And so when I got that report back and both my children, one's homozygous, one's heterozygous, we were going through a lot at the time with my youngest illness. Like when COVID came, it stirred up a lot of PTSD from when she was younger because of that isolation of her constantly being sick and not being able to go anywhere and, all that stuff for us. And so as a parent, I'm thankful that I had some sort of foundational history through my education and experiences to kind of navigate these things. But when that came back, I just dove into research mode, just like I had with the IgA deficiency. And was like, okay, now what? What does this mean for us? Right. And so a 7-year journey of what I'd done is what led me to become a functional nutritionist and being able to support this underserved community because there's far too many people that just don't get it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And something, I've been in this realm for a really long time too. And something that I find is that people tend to overcomplicate it. And it's funny, I did a genetics report with a family for a child last week, and they, that report comes back and it's like 35 or 40 pages. And I'm like, we're only going to focus on like the top, 4 or 5 genes that are affecting, your child right now, because it really is, it can be very complex. And I get frustrated because sometimes I feel like people keep it complex for complexity's sake or just to sound smart, when in reality, no, you need to be teaching people and telling them what they need to be able to like move forward, and improve, not to just sound, intelligent. And one thing I do want to back up and tell people, just in case you're not familiar with genetics, when we say homozygous and heterozygous means you only have one copy of the gene that we're talking about. Homozygous means you have 2. So when we're talking about it, I want you to understand moving forward exactly, what we are talking about.
So important to have this, I feel, as kids too, I've done anywhere from babies that are months old to elderly people. And I feel like the younger, the child or the person is, the more of an advantage you have to be able to prevent rather than correct, which is what healthcare is, right?
Yep, exactly. It's so true. So I'm going to have you start off by explaining what the MTHFR gene variant is and how it affects the process of methylation in our bodies.
Yeah. And I try to keep this in layman's terms. So Dr. Stephanie, if there's anything you want to add, for sure, pitch in. So something about me, just to preface this, is I, as a former anatomy teacher, I don't teach any of the things, the Krebs cycle, any of this stuff to my clients, because what I have found is most people have either done a lot of research by the time they get to me, or they simply don't care. They really just want to know how to feel better, right? And so MTHFR is methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. Say that 10 times fast, right? And that is a gene that you can either have one or two copies, depending on if one parent or two parents has a copy they share with you. And so obviously it's genetic. Your parents will have it too if you have it, at least one copy. And something, just a side note with this, is if you've ever done testing like we did with the pediatrician, she only tested for C677T. So there's two different ones to look at. And that's also important, right? And so if I was to start over in this journey, I would have gotten comprehensive testing, which is what Dr. Stephanie and I offer, because it gives a broader picture of what to look for, right? And how it affects methylation. So methylation affects several hundred different processes in our bodies. With one copy or two copies of the genes, it can severely compromise your ability to do that. So you're going to exhibit symptoms or experience symptoms of things like ADHD, anxiety, autism, migraines, fertility issues. I mean, there's literally hundreds of things that are tied to methylation. And so when I work with people, I generally work with women that have neurospicy brains because let's face it, we're the ones that we're noticing and then we're hyper fixating on figuring out the problem, right? So I hope that helps there and give a little clarity. Yeah. And anything you want to add on that there? Like I said, I like to keep it as simple as possible.
No, I think you brought up a lot of really good points. The fact that, yes, there is C677T, and then you have the other variant. I feel like it's 1298.
A1298C.
Right? I'm like, it's A1298C. Yep. And I'm like, I just literally read a genetics test, and it's funny because I like helped write genetic software, and it is really, really, really complicated. And that's why when we talk to people, we try to keep it very high level, because you can go down so many rabbit holes, and like there are so many, like we were talking about this before we hopped on. There's so many genes, and they don't operate in isolation. They, certain genes affect each other. And then within that, we talked about that methylation process. There are other biochemical processes that feed into it. And that's like when Rhiannon mentioned, like the Krebs cycle. We don't dive into this in a deep manner with people because we need to understand this. You guys don't necessarily need to understand this unless you really, really want to. And the truth of the matter is, I've learned over the years, most people don't really want to know the nuances of the biochemistry of these genes that affect enzymes, right? That make your body work. And so, yeah, so it's kind of it's a funny thing that the genetics, they are very important, but like we said, we try to keep it really high level. And so, that said, can you speak to some of those big players that have a really big kind of impact or interplay with MTHFR, like COMT or MAOA or, PEMT, those guys?
Yeah. So there's so many things that tie together. So for example, I have clients that'll come to me and be like, oh, I had testing and I had, I'm homozygous or I'm heterozygous. It's like an identity, right? Like, oh, I'm this. And they slap this label on themselves of like, oh, I have this. But that test didn't necessarily give enough information for a provider to actually work with if they know what they're doing. Right. And so they will either have tested like one copy, like we experienced with our pediatrician, or they will be like, oh, well, I tested this and this, and it's just too condensed. And with this, you have to really take a broad approach because these genes are interplaying. And I think I compare this a lot to, each system in the body. We have individual systems, but a lot of practitioners look at a single system and not a human, like as one whole system. And so that's what we have to do with our genes, is to really see them as partners in crime sometimes, and really just understand the impact that several genes can have. So MTRR, MTFD1, MTR, there's so many, there's like 10 or 15, I can't remember, that are tied to methylation, right? And so I always tell MTHFR people that it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle, right? And so we have to zoom out and see like COMT, for example, like you'd mentioned. So COMT really interplays with that anxiety piece. And it can have a huge effect on those of us that can't tolerate methyls well. Now, if you are like many people that scroll on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or wherever at this point, and you're seeing all these influencers out here saying, oh, just get L-methylfolate, you'll feel better, your anxiety is going to go away, your ADHD is going to be better. Bullshit. I'm sorry.
Yes,
sorry.
Rhiannon and I are here to say no to that. No,
Yes.
I'm with you 100%. And I'm glad you said that because we talked about this before too, because those just errant recommendations can really, really harm people, especially the people who have anxiety and MTHFR. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I first started like talking to people and like getting feedback of other mutants in our community, right? Like I asked people, like, tell me your experience. And oftentimes people will say, oh, well, I, heard about MTHFR and my practitioner told me either to take folic acid, prescription strength, no, or to take methylfolate. And within days, they were suicidal. And so, then just told to keep taking it. And here's an antidepressant. And I'm sorry, that's terrible. So today I did a TikTok live and people are asking me to put supplement recommendations. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I will not recommend supplements without looking at your genes. And then the only way to do that is to do a comprehensive test with me. I won't do it because it's irresponsible of me as a person and a practitioner to just blanket and say, hey, just everybody take this. Now, are there things that certain people should take? Yes. But also if their genes are already having an issue, we maybe need to look at a different piece of that. So instead of glutathione, we take the precursor to it and do NAD, right? And so like knowing those things, it's going to target what supplements to take, what foods to eat, lifestyle changes to make. And so with COMT, for example, that methyl inability to really work with methyls. Yes, you can take another supplement to help support the methyl, to help the process. Why take more supplements when you can just take a different form? I am all for keeping things simple and also getting it from your food. As a nutritionist, I will tell you, here's the things you want to get from your food. If we can't get those in your diet, then we need to look at a supplement, right? Because food is what gets into our body and it's what's made for our body. Supplements aren't necessarily made for our bodies, right? And so that COMT is so tricky, because, and this is one of the first questions I'll ask with people when I talk to them, like, how do you feel if you've taken methylfolate? And they'll say, oh, I felt really good in the beginning. And then I started feeling bad again. Or, oh, I noticed I was like really anxious. So here's a prime example. I started recently on a new supplement and I am my own guinea pig because I am a scientist. So are my children. And so I started a new supplement and it's to take up to 8 capsules a day. And I was like, oh, that's a lot. First off, who's going to be eating all that during the day? I don't have time to eat 8 capsules, but we'll try. We'll see. Let's see how this goes. So I started the first day with 2. Felt good. Next day, did 3. Felt okay. Next day, did 4. I felt like my skin was going to crawl off of me. Like I was so anxious because it's methylated, right? So small amounts for some people are okay. But with anything, don't just take the recommended dosage on it. You need to figure out what your body needs, how it's going to respond. Everybody's different. But then that COMT is also going to be playing into your estrogen, how that's going to be balancing out. So your hormone regulation. So Dutch testing, and I love the Dutch test for that reason, because you can really see how that's metabolizing, right? And then we have to look too is when it comes to hormones and that, are you having a regular bowel movement? Because estrogen moves that way too. What is your fat cells like? Because estrogen stores there. So there's so much more to come into play with that, right? And then your gut, like, are you able to absorb it? Your nervous system, is it activated? Because then you're not going to absorb anything, And so then looking at other genes, there are so many factors and people just want to take this, I have MTHFR and just put that on the shelf as like a trophy and be like, that's the reason. Well, it could be part of it, but there's more to it. right? And so we know detoxing is compromised with people with MTHFR as well, right? And so then we have to look at these other genes and see how those are interplaying, like GSTM1 and GPX and like all these other genes. And so people that do just the simple, genetic genie or whatever that only tests the C677T, have no idea about A129C or, the other methylated versions of the genes that we need to look at for methylation, then you don't have a comprehensive approach. And so it's just taking a bite out of, what you're doing, and cherry picking genes is what I heard another guy call it the other day when I was on a training. And I was like, that is so true. Because when you cherry pick the gene, instead of functioning on the whole person and seeing how these pathways, like we do on our reports, are interplaying with each other, it's not just one gene is doing one thing. It overlaps into several different areas: detoxing, methylation, hormone regulation. And so people don't understand when they just get raw data and throw it in a database, really what any of this means. So you see them going in groups going like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And then these people are giving these complex explanations and they still don't have any clarity on what they need to do. So it's frustrating.
No, I know. I agree with you.
There's my rant for the day.
I gotcha. I know. It is. This is, I would say it's a particularly, like it gets me, this topic gets me going, and I know it gets you going, and a lot of other practitioners I know that do genetics, because you do see a lot of that. You do see people who do some of what I think are the no-nos. They treat what's on paper and they don't treat the person. They will not do accompanying labs, like you had mentioned, the Dutch or an organic acids or serum labs, or things that are actually going to tell us about gene expression and what's happening in that person, right? Or else they, just like you said, they focus in on too few and don't zoom out to like the 50,000 foot picture where we can see what's happening. Because like you said, none of this is like happening in isolation. It's all like, we're very complex organisms, and there's so much interplay and influence. Like I always tell people, genes are more, it's an environmental issue. It's not really a genetics issue. It's like, what environment are those genes being expressed in? That's exactly, that's what we're looking for. Those are, the big details.
Yeah. Are they being activated? Just because you have it doesn't mean it's activated. And I think that that's a lot of people's misunderstanding. Like, oh my God, it's a death sentence. And I'm like, no, like if you aren't feeling symptoms, then let's look at the other things that you could be having an issue with and go with that and kind of dig deeper and get curious as to what's going on in there, But goodness, so often people just panic.
I feel like that was especially the case probably like 5 to 7 years ago. Like I feel like MTHFR, I'd say every 5 years or so, there are certain buzzwords and like the integrative, functional, holistic health world. And MTHFR was one of those about like, I'd say 5 to 8 years ago. And you're right. People viewed it as a death sentence. I'm like, my family is horrible, like MTHFR genetics. And we live well into our 90s with high cholesterol and all the things that are considered bad. It's so important to remember, like to focus on the individual. And like, I have, the ApoE gene for Alzheimer's, ApoE4. I'm a 3/4. And no one in my family has Alzheimer's, and we all have high cholesterol. And that's just, I'm not going to get onto the side tangent of that, but it's cholesterol processing is what's going on there and what that issue is. And there are certain things that happen in your brain that can contribute to Alzheimer's, but nobody in my family has it. So it's like one of those things. I'm not super duper worried. I mean, yes, we live in a much more toxic world than my grandmothers did, my great grandmother did. But like I said, I'm not super worried. I don't view these as a death sentence because I know I have the power to change it. I can change my diet. I can change my lifestyle. I can take the things that I might need to take to support the proper metabolism of, my B vitamins, my, just all of like supporting detox. For me, I also know that detox is a big issue. Like I have, and like a lot of people, like I am homozygous for one of the MTHFRs. I'm heterozygous for the other. I'm homozygous for COMT. I have a lot of the GPX and SOD, like, so those are detox genes. I've got those. It's like, I have all of the things that theoretically on paper, I always tell people, I'm like, I might look like a mess on paper, but I feel pretty darn good, and that's the reality of it. It's like, it's not a sentence. I get very, a death sentence, I should say. I get very frustrated when people like blame stuff on their genes. I'm like, you can't blame it on your genes. There's a very, very, very small percentage of truly genetic issues. And those are usually found at birth because they're expressed at that moment in time. Most of us can, go throughout our lives and just these are just like essentially what we're looking at these are genes. They're called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and they're just variations of a gene. There's nothing, more special than that. It's just a variation of a gene. That's all it is. It's like people always want to make it so complicated.
So I was just going to say, you mentioned the APOE at 3 and 4, and I'm not sure if you've seen the studies recently about how that's connected also to ADHD in kids.
Yeah. No, I haven't. Tell me more.
Yeah. So they have been doing studies and just have discovered that kids that have this, that expression of how it's being experienced in childhood is through ADHD-like symptoms and having those cognitive issues. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. You'll have to look at that information
That's
up.
interesting because my son has ADD. Yeah. And well, long story, my husband also is kind of on that spectrum too. So like I feel like our kids' genetics, my family and my husband's family have very similar genetics. So our kids' combinations are very interesting too. And so, yeah. We work on that every day. We control it largely with diet, clean water, filtered air in the house. And then we are using some supplements now that my son is 11 and his hormones are kicking in, which adds a whole other layer of complexity to the situation. I know, right? So much more complexity. So can you describe for people how MTHFR actually contributes to anxiety?
So when you have things that are like the methyl Bs, for example, right? We'll just run with that since that's a situation a lot of people are experiencing right now because they're hearing about it and trying it, right? So what's basically happening is that methylated version is not able to process in the body. And so it kind of like jams things up. So if you think about it like cogs in a wheel, and one of the cogs is like off center a little bit and it causes the whole wheel to get stuck, right? So things just can't process that. So what you have to do then is kind of take a back door and figure out another part in the process of methylation to be able to kind of bypass that situation in order to open up and activate the pathways to do that. But it's kind of like just a dam that's kind of built up that you're not able. So it's causing you this anxiety because your body just literally can't go through the process that it needs to be able to work through it, metabolize it, and utilize it in its fullest, purest form.
You use the same analogy I use. I always tell people it's like a log jam, and everything biochemically starts getting backed up and causing problems. And then you need to find a way to remove the log from the stream so that everything can flow. Because that's essentially what's happening. You're causing a backup of other like metabolic, metabolites, metabolic byproducts, all sorts of things that can back up and cause issues.
I was just going to say, with that, when I work with clients, when we get those tests back, because I know we use the same test, I love to be able to look at macronutrients and see in real time where in those cycles those things are backed up or if they're depleted, or that really gives us that real time focus. And so, it gives us a clear pathway to run on with people when we know, okay, your genes are likely doing this. So let's see now what they're actually doing and if they're doing what they should be doing or if there's something else we need to investigate. Right. And so I really feel like once you have that whole picture, you can shoot off with like, oh, well, this gene could be doing this. Maybe let's get this test ordered as well. So.
Right. Exactly. It is interesting because you can use what you see on the genetics also as a roadmap for where you might need to investigate later, and be super, super helpful in that regard too. Because even sometimes after you do a history, it's not always 100% clear, what testing might be indicated. So we were talking before about how, so many people think that genes are their fate. And I tell them that I usually say, no, the environment is your fate, meaning like we said before, what type of environment are your genes being expressed in? Is it nutrient dense with clean food, air, water, low stress, nature, sunlight, all of the, things that promote health? Or is it being expressed, within the standard American diet, a toxic home and personal care environment? Are you using like conventional products and not more like cleaner products? Do you have high stress? Do you not get out in nature? All of those things. Can you speak to what in your experience has been the biggest environmental impacts on MTHFR and methylation?
I would say a close tie would be mold and heavy metals. Would you agree with that for your experience too?
Oh,
yeah.
Totally.
So
totally. Yep.
Definitely see that. That's like a go-to test for everybody because, at some point or another, we're exposed to it, whether that be the air, the food, the water. And so I know that, was it you and I had talked about the plates that somebody had? I can't remember if that was you and I talking. Yes. Then that is so stuck with me, that the old Corellware or whatever. And after you and I talked about that, I was like, oh my God, I probably have like uber amounts of like lead in my like whole family because we use those for years, those little gold stamp ones. Those are like grandma's plates, right? Like, gotta use grandma's plates. So just that alone, you don't even realize, so that and mold is everywhere. I live in Florida, mold is everywhere, right? And so making sure, and it's not just here, right? But it's everywhere. Even when we lived in Nebraska, moisture gets in. Our houses are just not made to not have living organisms. No. So, living in Mexico, it was like, oh, hey, I live in cinder block. Oh, here in the States, oh, there's drywall. That gets moldy, and so it's just totally different with how we build homes here. And so it's very easy, especially when, I've seen it brand new homes that are moldy because the way that the houses are built, and so they've, let things get wet in between construction and that gets sealed up in walls and things get left outside with materials. And so it's just like people are like, oh, there's no mold in my house. It's brand new. And I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. So yeah, mold and heavy metal for sure.
Yeah, those are two of the big ones. It's so funny that you mentioned that because I remember I went to Ben Lynch's, his ShyCon, his Seeking Health conference, back, I can't remember if it was the 2015 or 2016 version of it, but he had a specialist come speak exactly on that, on just building materials alone and how, our modern building practices are so bad. The materials we use are not good. And it really is, perpetuating mold. I had a patient probably like 3 or 4 years back. And she's like, I live in a brand new house. And I was like, just do me a favor. I'm like, just go around at the house. Like they'd only lived in it for 2 months. It was brand new build. I'm like, go around your house, just look to see if there's anything that looks suspicious of water damage. And she found it was by a doorway. There was like just a little tiny ring of water. And in fact, there was only a little tiny ring of water showing up on the ceiling, but behind the walls, there was tons of mold growing. And she's like, I had no idea. I'm like, none of us do. You have to have a proper inspection to know about this. And yeah, mold has showed up in my practice in so many ways. The first place was when I started seeing a lot of moms and kids for eczema. And that being like 10 years ago, we realized it was a major root cause of eczema. And so it showed up there, but I really see the effects of it on the genetic piece of the puzzle, because the people who have MTHFR and some of the detoxification SNPs, those are the people who end up having more severe symptoms. Like in my family, when we were exposed to mold, I had the most severe symptoms, and I probably have the worst, genetics for detoxification out of all of us. And so I'm the one who had the rashes and the sneezing and all of that stuff, even though my mycotoxin levels were not as high as other members of my family, but I just can't get rid of it. So, I was hardcore supporting, methylation and detox and all that.
Definitely. And the other thing too is like, when we don't only just look at MTHFR and you zoom out, we can look at those histamine genes too and see how those with the hormones and all that stuff too interplay. And so that mold and that histamine, I had a client one of my first clients that I started working with when I started my program, And we uncovered the fact that she was dealing with mast cell, and she'd worked with practitioners for years and couldn't figure it out. And I was just like, I think, let's do this. And then we got our report back, and I was like, well, we were on the right track. Let's make a couple tweaks, and she, after 6 weeks, had amazing success and results, ended up losing 55 pounds of inflammation, right? Which is also super important because these people have all this inflammation and it just stores up. And so people that are like, oh, I can't lose weight. Okay, well, there's a lot of things that could be attributed to. It could be hormonal. It could be the inability to detox, oxidative stress, there's so many things that could come into play. But that wasn't her focus. She was like, I'm a little fluffy. I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, well, we'll worry about that later. Let's focus on the main thing here. And it was amazing. So you just never know.
That brings up another point that I don't think people really understand is the impact that MTHFR and a lot of these other genes have on detoxification and your gut, but it's kind of like a feed forward and a backward cycle. They feed into each other. So it's if your gut and your detoxification are not doing well, it's going to put more stress on those genetics. And then as those genetics become more compromised, it's going to put more stress on your gut and your liver. And so I wanted you to, speak to that as well. What are, like you kind of just mentioned, what are you seeing in your practice with regard to that?
Yeah. I mean, fatty liver is very common too, right? Hearing about that with people with MTHFR because the inability to detox. And so once you know that, adding in things like milk thistle and just small changes that are going to make a big impact, you don't have to freak out about it, right? It's just let me add a few things into my regular routine to be able to support my body. Now, the big piece I will say too, is there's a practitioner that I partner with and she does sound therapy. And in my program, she talks a little bit about how the vagus nerve and B12 absorption and MTHFR are all interplayed. And I was just like, tell me more, this is so cool. But if we don't work on our nervous system, nothing that we do nutritionally is going to stick anyways. Our gut's still going to be tore up because of our stress, right? And so the main focus for a lot of people that is overlooked is the stress component because they don't take the time or don't have a practitioner that's educated in a well-rounded approach to make sure all of these key pieces are working together. It's just let me give you supplements. It's like patching holes in a boat. You're just constantly trying to fix things instead of seeing your whole person and being like, okay, I need to make some changes here. And so that's really, I feel a big part of it too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny that you bring that up because, back when I was in the clinic where we only I know some of the listeners know that I used to work in a clinic that just saw Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, celiac, that type of stuff. It was in that setting that I became aware of the important connection between the vagus nerve and the gut and everything literally. But it was interesting because that was kind of one of the first steps that kind of got me going into, doing the other stuff that I do. That's when I first started learning more about breath work and meditation and implementing some of that into my practice and giving people vagus nerve stimulation exercises and all of the little things that we can do to support, that nervous system health, because that literally is the foundation, like you mentioned. And then obviously I kind of parlayed that into more the trauma therapy and a lot of the other things that I do in practice too, because there are a few things that will sabotage even the best laid treatment plans. And I tell people, I'm if you're not going to do the lifestyle stuff, if you will not bother to do, the diet changes and the lifestyle changes, if you're not sleeping and if you are not actively trying to regulate your nervous system, nothing is going to work because it's those factors form the base of I always call it the healing pyramid. They are the base of the healing pyramid. You can throw all the supplements and medications and everything else at it and it's not going to work or it's not going to take if you are not working on those other factors.
Yeah. I mean, I literally, you and I are so aligned on all this stuff because I say it all the time. I call it the trifecta, right? The three things that are most important. And that's arguably, I feel the most important because if you're never in a regulated state. You don't know how to relax. You constantly have anxiety. The food that we're eating is not only causing a lot of it, because that standard American diet, inflammation overall, but also neuroinflammation. And that's also going to trigger some anxiety in there as well. And so making sure that you're eating properly and working to regulate your nervous system, there's 3 parts to it. It's a 3-pronged approach that you really have to take in order to see long-term sustainable results, for sure.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be that complex. People are like, do I have to be on some special diet? No, you don't. Like, all you have to do is eat whole foods. Eat whole foods. Don't eat processed foods, try to get out in nature a couple times a day. Like, you don't even have to do anything crazy. Like, just go sit on your porch. Preferably walking would be great, moving your body out there. It's like, a lot of this stuff is super easy. A lot of it is just us being mindful and intentional about it, and then incorporating it into our days. Like, it's essentially, it's habit change and routine change for a lot of people. And those, like, I find that a lot of that actually leads to the more profound changes. Yes, the protocols help, and some supplements really can make a pretty dramatic difference if you're really struggling with certain things. But it's these foundational pieces that are really, really important, but especially the nervous system regulation, because I actually in my practice now do not, like, if I have people who are not doing that stuff, like, I'm like, we cannot work together if you're not going to be doing this. Like, because before, some people would just spin their wheels and do the same thing over and over again and be like, I'm trying. And I'd be like, but you're wasting your money. And I don't want you to waste your money. And I don't want you to waste your time. I want you to actually get results. So we need to do this stuff. So that when people are working with me, they know that we're working on all of these things. And I ask about it in every appointment. I'm like, I ask about what they're doing and, how things are going with regard to all of that. And if they're not doing that, we're going to focus on that and not the other thing.
Yeah. And there's only so much that you can do to change and implement all at one time, like some people will go, oh my gosh, I've got all these things to do. And it's like, let's take it one bite at a time. What are you most comfortable with now? What are you really struggling with? Like, okay, yes, the food thing we can work on, but if you are not sleeping, your kid's stressing you out, like whatever, like let's focus on what tweaks can we make in your day. Do you need a morning routine to be able to settle into the day with intention and focus? Like, how can those small tweaks make a big impact on the rest of your day?
Oh, absolutely. And that you bring up a really good point, is like, what does that particular individual need? I think that is something that I feel like somewhere in functional medicine that has gotten lost a little bit. There are a lot of people who are all about protocols, and this is my exact program, and this is what I do. We still can't lose sight of the individuality and what each person needs, right? Like, that's the really important stuff.
Well, and that's just it. Like, with the testing that we offer, it's a lot easier to do that customized approach, because you can marry a standard protocol, so to speak, or a program or something like that, but piece it out and emphasize things that certain people are, as opposed to just here's something for everyone, right? Like, here's the roadmap, but you may have a detour over here for you because you'd have extra things that we need to work on.
Right. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The individuality, I think, it's the brilliance of like functional medicine and integrative medicine and all those things. But I feel like in the climate that we're in right now, and there's so many people out there that are trying to influence other people, I feel like a lot of that nuance and individuality is lost. And that's, that's an issue. But yeah, so that leads me into the last question I wanted to ask you, which was about if somebody knows they have a MTHFR. So we're speaking to somebody who already knows this, right? What are like the 3 kind of quick tips that you give them to like say, hey, this is how you can get the ball rolling even before we do anything drastic, especially for those individuals with anxiety?
So some quick things you can do is kind of take an inventory of a snapshot of their situation, really, right? Like, I need to know a little bit more, like, are you going for walks every day? How are you doing anything for yourself? Like, what does that look like? What are the toxins like in your home? Like, are you, surrounded by chemicals and cleaners? Are you using deodorant that's got aluminum? Like, give me a little bit of idea on what your day to day looks like. And then I've had people too with like heavy metals in their body that we've kind of figured out that it was from driving in a car for extended periods of time, like commuting back and forth to work. And so, there's that too. So just getting to know their lifestyle, what that looks like now, and then understanding what areas that you can focus on to help them improve.
Awesome. Are there any dietary recommendations that you usually give them?
Yes. So as a nutritionist, I always encourage everybody to lean towards going gluten and dairy free in America. I'm going to put that asterisk on there. In America.
It is. I agree.
Yeah. Because just the way that things are processed here, right? And so you'll see people all over the internet that's got celiac that goes to Europe and has had regular bread or regular cheese there, and they, lactose intolerance, and they're completely okay. Now, that doesn't mean that they're like not having a gut issue or an intestinal permeability, but their symptoms that they would normally experience in America are being shown. And so dairy and gluten are highly inflammatory and addictive, especially. And so, once I tell people a lot of times that dairy fits into opioid receptors and that's why they crave it, they are like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Yes. So that is really the big shift for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The caseomorphins and the gluteomorphins I don't think people understand that. I've told that to some people and it's like blown their minds, and they're like, that's why I love it so much. I'm like, yeah, you're getting a high off of it. I mean, it's making you happy. It's like the same as getting all those dopamine hits from, whatever it is that you find pleasure from it, whether it's sugar or food or exercise or, shopping. There's lots of things we can get addicted to and get those dopamine hits, and that kind of speaks to your COMT gene. But yeah, it's so interesting.
Yes. Not only that, but I love in the testing that we can test for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would say the other recommendation I give people, I honestly truly do prefer people go gluten and dairy free. But if people aren't doing that, what I will say is like, if you're not willing to get rid of it, if I have somebody, I'll give the caveat. If they are celiac, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or they have family histories of it, I tell them like, you really need to do this. People who don't have that, you can get away with eating gluten sometimes, but I usually tell people to get it in things that are imported from Europe, like Italy. Italy, we can get a lot of pasta and bread and things here now. Even some dairies, you can get some good cheeses and things like that from Europe too. Just don't eat what we have here, because even like the organic produce that's produced in California is not great either. So it's like, we live in an age where you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And it's unfortunately, we need to be a little more vigilant about, everything in our life. Are we using, like we said before, the cleaner, personal care products? Driving, like if you're driving a long distance every day, you probably should be supporting your detox on a daily basis in some way, shape, or form. Our food, air, water supply, just not clean. Even things that are organic in the United States are not 100% clean, depending upon where they're grown, because of like agricultural runoff. And, this is a whole other discussion, but organic certification allows for fields to be actually sprayed ahead of time. There's a lot of things that contribute to all of this. So what I tell people is, on the diet side, yes, if you can go gluten and dairy free, that's great. Try organic or better if possible. If your budget like leans towards that, that's great. If you can do that. If not, if you can't do, organic all the time, look at like the Dirty Dozen list. They update that on an annual basis, and it tells you the biggest offenders. That's from the Environmental Working Group. Tells you the biggest offenders for pesticides and insecticides on produce. And just add more vegetables, add more, especially green vegetables are going to be good to support these genes.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure that people know that GMO and not organic are two different things, because a lot of times you'll see a GMO free label and you'll be like, oh, it's fine. And then you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was not organic. Like they're two totally separate entities. And so making people aware of that, like, and having that when they're shopping, that's important. And, toxins from cans and, canned food, making sure you're not using plastics. There's so many different things, right, that we're exposed to on a daily basis. Yeah.
Oh, everywhere. Yeah. It's so funny because this is a total aside, but I was having a conversation with my husband the other day, and these are the weird thoughts that come into my head all the time. And I feel like this kind of harkens to like the nerdiness. And I'm like, our ancestors must think, like, if they were to see us now, even 100 years ago, like if my great grandparents were to see us, they would think we are like the weirdest people on the planet, because we do specialized things to support detoxification and to make our teeth white and to make our muscles big and huge. And all of these things that are so weird and so modern. They're modern problems. They're essentially byproducts of our, technological evolution, right? It's like, it's really, really interesting. And I'm like, our ancestors would sit there and think like we are crazy because of all of the weird things that we have to do just to be healthy and survive. And obviously they faced their own challenges, and life back then was not easy, but we today are exposed to so many more chemicals and just chemicals, stress. Our lives are dramatically different. We're not as connected as we used to be. We don't have the community structure that we all actually need to, very much thrive in life. There's so many things that are missing that they had. And it's like, part of me wishes that we could get back to that, like, you could call it a simpler time. I would call it a cleaner time, a much cleaner time. It would, it's like, those are the weird things that pop into my head. I'm like, for some reason, I was thinking about
it's one of those things, too, that's like, oh, no, it's funny that you mentioned it, though, because a friend and I, she sent me a video the other day about MTHFR and she's like, imagine our ancestors and what they would say about this. And so it's so funny that you mentioned that today. But, it's just so interesting. The problems that we have as a modern day problem aren't going to go away. They're not going to get any better. But, the EWG does an excellent job with providing lists, too, of quality products that are verified, that are safe. Think Dirty is another tool that I utilize as well as my clients. And so that one is good. But, EWG is an excellent resource, and you can just download their app, and that's super helpful to be able to scan stuff. But like, it's so hard to find some organic products. Like, I've been hunting for organic cherries, and the only place I found them was at Sprouts. And it was like a frenzy. Like, everybody was like, cherries, And so finding them in season and that are organic is very difficult. Nectarines, I mean, those suckers are expensive. At Publix are like $7.50 for a bag. I'm like, I want some nectarines, but is it worth $7.50? Like, so
it's become increasingly more difficult and more expensive to be healthy. Like like Rhiannon and I said before, like this is a marathon. When we ask you to make these changes, we're not saying do all of this at once. Pick what's highest priority for you, what's impacting your health or your family's health the most, and make that change first. And like I do the same thing. I go to the grocery store and I'm like, and I, depending upon the week and how much time I have, I will go to different places. I usually start off, we have a good farmer's market here. So I'll start off there. I'll go every other Saturday. I also get some food delivery for meat because I have found that that's actually much more cost effective than going to the store and trying to buy, pasture raised or organic or, regenerative meat anymore. But like, I go to different stores, like you said, like I'll check out like Costco. Our Costco has a fair amount of good priced organic stuff. I was with my sister in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago, and I was so frustrated because they have organic broccoli and we don't. And I was like, I would give anything for the organic broccoli because it is so expensive. And like you could buy a little tiny bag at like a place like Whole Foods, or even Target sells it now, but it's like $4 for like 8 ounces. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. There's so many things. It's funny. So like I've been opting for like the baby broccoli or the broccolini lately because that's growing fresh. It's on sale. It's like you can buy a bunch for like $2 or $2.50. It's like, you have to make choices. Like,
yep, it's seasonal. So right now it's 30.
Yeah. I mean, it's making the choices.
Yep, you absolutely do. And that's the thing. Toxins, I feel like it is. And toxins, I feel like are a really pretty easy one for most people to do because they can open their cabinets and start like just ditching stuff, right? And then just knowing like vinegar and water and baking soda are like your cleaning product. Like that's such a simple solution for people that they're like, okay, I can do that. Like I can ditch all this other crap and just do vinegar and water and baking soda. Okay, that's cool.
No, you're totally right. Like there are so many simple solutions. And there's also, I mean, you can buy, there's like the company, Branch Basics. I don't use it. My sister uses Branch Basics, and I realize like she uses it everywhere in her house. I tend to do what you're doing, like the vinegar. I use vinegar, hydrogen peroxide, baking soda for a lot of solutions I make, but I use a company called Force of Nature. And that's essentially almost like a hydrogen peroxide. You put it in water and it becomes like a cleaning solution. So that's what I use. And you can make it that actually, when you go to doing stuff like that, it eliminates a bunch of categories of different like cleaners and sprays. So you're saving money there. So it's like important to look at all these things because people automatically assume that being healthy is expensive. And don't get me wrong, it definitely can be, but there are some potential like positives to it, you can there, and you like we said, you do what you can do within your means. That is one of the most important things, and don't beat yourself up if you can't. I mean, there are times when I have to buy something that's like conventional and I do it. I don't stress about it. When I was younger, I probably stressed about it more, but now I'm just like, you know what? I take care of my body and my body is going to take care of me.
Yep. Well, and if it's not a repeat offender, right? Like that you're doing on a regular basis and you know that it's not like we don't really eat out, but if we want to go grab some Chipotle every now and then we know that rice is probably enriched, but we know the next day we're going to probably be spicy a little bit, but making sure that we do a detox bath and take the vitamins and, make sure we're eating otherwise healthy. It's just sometimes you got to treat yourself, like give yourself some slack, have some grace for yourself too. And it's a journey.
Yeah. And truthfully, Chipotle, out of all of like the fast food, fast casual types of places, they're one of the better places to go. They used to advertise that they used a lot of organic and they like regenerative farming practices and all that. They still try to do that as much as possible. There aren't many companies, especially fast food, fast casual, that do that. So if we go out, that actually is one of the places that we will go. There are very, very, very few places we will eat out at like that. And then, if we want to get real fancy, like there are places, up, in Denver or in like north of us, there are restaurants that are completely gluten-free. There are restaurants that are like gluten-free, dairy-free, nut seed-free, or I should say industrial seed oil. So it's like any of the bad oils. So it's like, if we want to splurge, sometimes we'll go do something like that, but we don't do it very often either, just because it's, the more you're eating out, the more you're getting exposed to a lot of those things.
Exactly. And there's a place here, they're a chain called Fresh Kitchen. I don't know if you guys have them up there, but oh my God, it's gluten-free, dairy-free. Oh my God, it's so good. It's like, oh, that's my addiction. I'm like, oh, and people are like, oh, Rhiannon's going to Fresh Kitchen again. I'm like, yes, I got to get my almond chicken. Like, leave me alone. But it's good food. And it's like something I feel like confident in that if I'm going to go eat out and enjoy myself eating out, then it's also going to be beneficial to my body because I'm getting cauliflower rice. And, it's different. It's just healthier options. And still an experience.
Yes. And also sometimes it's nice not to have to cook and be the person doing the cooking. But yeah, it's so funny. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rhiannon, for coming on today and sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with us. And if our listeners want to, find you, where can they find you? And if you have anything that you want to share with them, please go ahead and share that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on TikTok until that gets banned, I guess, and Instagram at MTHFR_coach. And you can visit the website revitalizing-wellness.com, learn a little bit more about me and what programs are being offered. Obviously, Dr. Stephanie and I do the same type of testing together. And I focus, like I said, on the neurospicy women that need the support because, us neurospicies need to have a support anyway, let alone adding the MTHFR spice in there too. So Awesome.
Yeah. And I'll also add that Rhiannon has quizzes on her website. So if you want to go in there and play around with that, you can do that too. Because I know I'm a sucker for a quiz. Oh, awesome.
Yes, I've got methylation quizzes and MTHFR quizzes and hormone quizzes, all sorts of nervous system regulation quizzes. So those I just dropped recently, and I've been really getting good feedback from those from people. So it's been fun. I'm a quiz taker too.
I know. I love them. I'm like, what am I going to get? Yeah, although most of the time I can tell by the direction of where the questions are going, right? I can tell by the direction of what the questions are asking me, where it's leading me to, but it's still fun to do it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Rhiannon. I appreciate your time. And if you do have any genetic issues, I definitely encourage you to go check her out.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.